Chaos needs no allies, for it dwells like a poison in every one of us. I have just finished Midnight Tides, the fifth book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson, and I want to talk about it because this one is pretty good. It's definitely not my favorite, but it's also not my least favorite, so I want to get straight into it. First of all, what can you expect from Midnight Tides? Well, surprisingly, this book is probably the most straightforward Malazan book so far. This is essentially, without any spoilers, two factions, two very different factions, two empires, one that is currently on the rise and one that is dwindling, going to war with one another because they have a long-term beef with one another over trading rights and all sorts of stuff that I'm not going to get too deep into. And it's just kind of the exploration of war and just how these two factions view each other and all sorts of stuff like that. I will say, though, that I think Midnight Tides, if you're new to this series, and I'm sure the Malazan fans will disagree, but I think if you're new to this series and you're really struggling with Gardens of the Moon, this wouldn't be a bad one to read because the plot is super straightforward. I think the characters are all very well done, especially the main characters. And I think it's pretty easy to follow generally what's going on. You're going to miss some tidbits here and there because you don't have the Malazan background of reading, for these chunkers, or 5 at this point. But this would not be a bad place to start, especially considering it's a prequel to this entire series. It takes place about 3 or 4 years before Gardens of the Moon's events happen. So it's a pretty big deal. This is really laying the groundwork for a lot of the things that kind of happen in House of Chains specifically, and maybe even Dead House Gates. I'm going to leave that up to interpretation, but it definitely has some major lasting effects for the rest of this series. So this wouldn't be a bad one to pick up first. But what can you expect besides the fact that it's good because it's Steven Erikson writing it? Well, great characters, first of all. No surprise there, Steven Erikson. I've said time and time again that he is just one of those authors who makes me enjoy almost every character I read, from the main characters or the ones who are at the forefront of the plot to the side characters to, the characters who you just kind of see in passing. Erikson really has this talent to just bring an ensemble of a cast together and just make it all work. I mean, the dude is just talented. He is so good at conveying how you are supposed to feel or what you should feel towards characters that have, a limited amount of page space. Because most of these characters, besides like 1 or 2, are not names you're going to recognize. Even if you're 5 books deep like I am now, there's like 1 or 2 names in here that I recognize, and the rest are completely new characters on a completely new continent. So, the fact that he manages to make you get attached to these characters in like 900 pages or less, I think is really, really impressive. I actually think that this is his best character work to date, in my opinion. Like, as an overall cast. Not my favorite characters, but as an overall cast, I think this is his best work. I think the dynamics here are really great because this is really a story about brotherhood. This is about a series of 2 sets of brothers and kind of how they interact with one another and mirror one another and why they're different from one another and how they end up in the places they do. And I can't get any more specific with that without spoilers. But this one is really about brotherhood, and having a brother myself, a younger brother, it kind of hit home for me, especially towards the end as some things were shown and revealed. I really kind of felt it in my own way. This is probably the one I've gotten close to crying over. This is probably the one that's made me the most emotional. There was a sequence in this book where I was like, I might shed a few tears here. So to say that I was emotionally invested is a bit of an understatement because this is great when it comes to characters and character dynamics. To the surprise of literally no one who's read any of the Malazan books, the action is very well done here. This one is probably the least insane when it comes to action, but the way that it's delivered, I think, makes it almost more real. It feels very grounded somehow in yet such a fantastical world. A lot of the action is kind of like, I feel like it's less magic-y and it's more sword fighty. And I mean, I love the magic in this series, but for some reason, sword fights always work better for me. I guess I can visualize it better. But even the magic in this, the magic battles that happen in this one, I was like, oh, like it was like very visual. Like the way Erikson continues to write action in this, like it really pops. Like when it happens, you're like, oh, like that was super violent. And that's another thing. This book is pretty violent. It's pretty graphic. And it probably has some of the coolest concepts and overall themes and plotting that we've seen in this series so far. I think this is really the book where Erikson shows off his own philosophical and political worldview. And, not to like talk politics on my channel or anything, but like I find that a lot of authors, when they put politics in their books, even ones I agree with, they tend to get a little preachy with it. But Erikson somehow is so good at writing that even when he inserts his own political beliefs and you recognize it, it's done in a way that feels authentic and real to the characters who are spouting these things. And it never feels like, oh, the author really wants me to like believe this because he believes it. No, it just feels very relevant to the events of the book in place. Because as you can guys imagine, this is about two empires at war. There's going to be discussion about colonialism and its effects. There's going to be discussion about, racial identity to a degree. There's stuff about economics and the nature of, what system actually would benefit the most amount of people. And I think it's done in a way that is very, very well conveyed. It never felt preachy to me. And, if it had, I would say so, because even though I think Erikson and I are agreeing philosophically and politically here, I tend to dislike when authors kind of get like all super like, this is what you have to believe because I believe it. So I think that's very well handled. I think that this has overall the easiest plot to follow, just generally speaking. I think the character work here is probably the strongest overall. I think the comedy here is actually something that is super noteworthy. There are these two characters, Taeho and Bug. And honestly, if you don't like those two as a comedic duo, I don't know what's wrong with you, because they are so genuinely funny. The way they work off one another, especially if you're listening in it on audio like I often do and doing immersive reads and stuff like that, I think you're gonna have a good time. Like, you're gonna laugh. I laughed quite a lot during this book. Erikson just has this very kind of like subtle but like, I don't know, like biting sense of humor that I just really enjoy. He's no Joe Abercrombie, don't get it twisted. Joe's the king. Abercrombie's the king of humor in fantasy, but Erikson's right up there. Like, he is genuinely very funny. And I think this is his funniest book yet. I had a lot of moments where I was laughing out loud. So I think there's a lot that you can really look forward to in this book. You can look forward to great humor. You can look forward to a great plot that's actually structured in a way that is somewhat normal for those of you who are maybe having a hard time with the other ones. I think the characters are great. I think the dynamics are really well done. I think the philosophy and the politics here are spoken about in a way that never feels preachy, but it actually feels genuine and authentic in a way that few fantasy authors, at least I've read, managed to achieve. And honestly, if I had to pick a book as a starting point that isn't Gardens of the Moon, this would probably be it for new readers, just because I think the story is so self-contained compared to the other ones, and it's the easiest one to follow. I really liked it. It was really good. There's really no negatives about this book that I can think of besides the somewhat slow start, but once you get into part 2, it's nothing but pure gas, in my opinion. It has some of the best twists in the series so far. It's everything you expect from Malazan at this point. Of course, it's not going to be a disappointment. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. And that is my ranking.